Hey everyone, I hope you are all doing very well. I'm speaking to you, uploading my first video, I'm pretty sure, from my new city of residence, which I will reveal to you what that is shortly. But I recently moved out of New York City, where, by the way, it is illegal to my knowledge to have an active fireplace running. So in honor of it, I have an active fireplace running in the background. And I want to make this video to talk about a couple of the main reasons I left New York specifically as a filmmaker. Now, I think this video will apply to anyone who's having the same issues in New York that I did, but I say specifically as a filmmaker because people know New York to be the mecca for film on the East Coast. It's kind of like the East Coast Hollywood. So I think it was confusing to a lot of people why me as a filmmaker would leave, move across the country, and not go to LA. So I'm gonna get into a little of that, but if you don't watch any more than this, the main reason I'm gonna give you is basically not that there's a lack of opportunity in New York, because there's an abundance of opportunity, but to me, opportunity doesn't mean too much if you don't have good quality of life, good mental health, and those are really the real issues that I have with New York that I'm gonna get into. So first of all, the city that I'm currently in is Seattle, Washington. Now, after I give you my reasons for why I left New York, I'll explain why that led me to Seattle as a filmmaker, why I feel like it's great for me here, why it might be great for some of you. But without further ado, let's get into it. First reason I left New York City as a filmmaker is cost of living. When you're a filmmaker, money is valuable. Resources are valuable, time is valuable. You want time to work on your own stuff. You don't want to be bogged down with paying rent all the time. And New York has the most expensive rent in the country. Of course, there are places up there like San Francisco, DC, and so forth. But I believe, based on some research, that New York has the worst bang for your buck in the country. You pay the most rent and you get the least space. Just for a little bit of context, I lived in a 4-bedroom apartment. Shared a 4-bedroom apartment, 3 roommates. I had one of the cheapest rooms and I was still paying $1,500 a month. Then I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe it'd be better to get my own space. Maybe pay a little more money, get my own space, have more privacy where I could write, focus on things. So I moved to a studio apartment in Brooklyn, which these days Brooklyn isn't even that much cheaper than Manhattan. In Brooklyn, for this tiny 400 square foot studio, I was paying $2,100 a month. Now, for contrast, I am now in Seattle, Washington, which by the way is still one of the most expensive cities in the US, sharing a 750 square foot 1-bedroom with my girlfriend. And we are paying $1,700 total in rent, which means that I pay $850, she pays $850. And obviously it's different than roommates because I'm sharing it with someone I'm close with and extremely comfortable with. It's like just 2 versions of me in one apartment, which is pretty cool. But anyway, the difference from Seattle to New York is I get 400 more square feet of space, and our total rent is $400 less than what my studio was. So again, Seattle's one of the most expensive cities, but that's just to show you how overtly expensive New York is. Like when I was in New York, I felt like I was living just to pay rent. I felt like everything I did every day was geared toward making my rent at the end of the month and having enough money for food. Here, honestly, I hardly even think about it. You have cheaper rent in Seattle and still a higher minimum wage than New York, so you get paid better. And in New York, the cost of living isn't just the amount of money you pay to live somewhere. It's also all the expenses of living in the city. It feels like the city is constantly draining you of your money in New York. So for instance, if you own a car in New York, which by the way, from firsthand experience is a terrible idea, you have to worry all the time about getting a ticket. Because first of all, you have to wake up twice a week in New York for alternate side parking for street cleaning. There's street cleaning twice a week. The city doesn't really get that clean anyway. The street cleaning vehicle literally comes for less than 5 minutes, but during those street cleaning windows, you still have to wait in your car for an hour and a half to get outside that alternate side parking window so that you don't get a ticket. Even when you're not moving your car for alternate side parking, you're still getting ticketed for the most random things. Like, for example, I once got a ticket because they wrote on the ticket, my license plate was bent and my license plate number was unreadable. But I was thinking to myself, if my license plate number was so unreadable, how did you read it enough to give my car a ticket? There was another time where I was working for a food delivery service, and I was delivering food to a university student in quarantine. Left my car standing outside their dorm for 2 minutes. This ruthless city still threw me a ticket. So that's just one example of something, but you're dealing with stuff all the time. It just feels like you're always paying some sort of due just to stay afloat in the city. And as an artist, which already isn't the most lucrative profession at the very beginning, you don't want to have that weight on your shoulder all the time. So again, like, it doesn't matter how much opportunity there is in New York. If you don't have energy to seize that opportunity, what's the point? If you don't have energy to work on what you need to work on to present to the people giving you opportunities, what's the point? That is cost of living. Now, again, I was speaking with cost of living, how small your living space is. That leads me to my second issue with New York, which is the lack of space. Not only in your box, your closet of an apartment, but also outside on the streets. The streets are so narrow, it just feels like every day you're going through a human obstacle course. You're having to dodge people left and right. You're having to dodge cars that honestly, the drivers in New York are crazy. And I say this as a New York driver. Honestly, cars are trying to hit you, and it just feels like the city is antagonizing you every step you go. There is nowhere you can go in this city where you have complete privacy, where you have complete quiet. Trust me, I've tried to move to the most quiet neighborhoods. You never have that sense of security, privacy, vulnerability that you want, especially if you're a writer and you need a moment alone. And that sense of privacy goes hand in hand with the noise that's in the city. So that leads me to my third reason why I left New York, which is the noise. And this is honestly the biggest reason for me. There is never not noise in New York. To me, New York isn't just the city that never sleeps. To me, New York is the city that never shuts the fuck up. To me, New York is the city where everyone wants to be left alone and no one leaves each other alone. There is always some form of harassing noise, whether it's construction, whether it's an ambulance, some sort of siren, a car honking, people physically or verbally getting into a fight on the street. It's just not conducive to coming up with ideas or inspiration or being vulnerable enough to write any honest work when you're walking on the street and someone's about to, slam on their horn, or people are getting in a fight on the street. And the fact that you even know that's coming every single day, it honestly happens every single day, you don't even push yourself to get in the state where you want to write because you know you're going to be disturbed, you know you're going to be distracted. On the other hand, here in Seattle, yes, there are a lot of issues in Seattle. There's a lot of madness going on here right now. The city's going through a lot of transformation, but there are tons of neighborhoods, including the one I moved into in Wallingford, that are so quaint and quiet, it honestly feels just like a writer's retreat. And again, coming back to the lack of opportunity in Seattle versus New York, it doesn't matter to me, because at the end of the day, if I can write a better script in Seattle, that's all that matters, is me getting that film made. If I can never come up with the film in the first place in New York, it defeats the whole purpose of living there for that opportunity. And something that makes it even harder is the weather. Now, I know it sounds ironic saying I left New York City because of the weather, considering a lot of people view Seattle as a gloomy and rainy city, which it is. But I honestly don't mind that much, considering how predictable the weather is here. You basically get 40 to 80 degrees year round, whereas New York City ranges from 0 to 100 degrees. It's either disgustingly hot or bitterly cold and windy. The weather, yes, it matches the extremity of everything else in the city. And when it rains, it pours in New York City. So being in New York City is often like a bad movie. Everything else is going wrong for you financially, stress, you don't have any space, you don't have any privacy, and it will always be at the worst possible moment that the rain will come pouring down when you didn't bring an umbrella, when all the subways are shut down and disgusting, and you have no way to get home and you have to walk for like 40 minutes. That's always when it rains, and it rains like God is taking a giant wet shit on you. And I know that's dramatic, I know that is vile, but that is what it feels like very often. The rain is so intense in New York that I will give you a fun fact if you think Seattle's a rainy place. Basically, Seattle rains 30 more days a year than New York, but New York still gets more total rainfall than Seattle. So that just speaks to the intensity of the rain when it does rain. And that's not the only precipitation that's in New York. Just wait for the snow, just wait for the dirty ice. Now, I'm a fan of snow. I like kind of the romantic nature of the winter time. But in New York, you really just get like dirty slush on the street, just gross puddles that you have to avoid. That makes it all the more difficult to walk around people. That makes it all the more stressful to get around the city. And also, New York has this wind tunnel effect where it gets insanely windy and it just blows up all the dirt, all the trash from the city into your eyes, which leads me to my next point. Reason number 5 as to why I left New York City, which is that it's really dirty. Even parts of New York City that don't have litter lying around everywhere, even though there's always litter in the subway platforms and the subway tracks, and like New York is known as a great place for public transportation, but the reality is there's so many delays and there's never AC in the subway and it's always so sweaty and dirty. And imagine during a pandemic just being crammed with a bunch of people. But forget that, forget the subway, forget the parts that have trash littered everywhere. Even in the parts of New York where there isn't trash littered everywhere, there's something that feels really grimy and dirty about the streets. They just don't feel clean, as to what I was speaking about before, that even the street cleaners come more than any other city, right? In contrast with Chicago, the street cleaners come like once every 3 weeks or whatever it is. New York, they come twice a week, and it just still feels like an apocalyptic city at times with how dirty it feels. Whereas you go to another city like Chicago, which sometimes gets a bad rap for other reasons, and the streets just feel sparkling. Like, it's so funny that people always refer to New York City as the city with streets paved of gold, because I honestly feel like it's the exact opposite. Now again, I know this all sounds really negative and I don't want to cast a negative light on New York if you're enjoying your experience there. This is really only for people who feel the social pressure to stay there but aren't really enjoying themselves. And I would say that all the reasons I just listed would be worth it if you got some sort of amazing social experience in New York, which is how people living there often try to portray it, like it's some sort of unparalleled social experience that everyone has FOMO about. But the reality is, reason number 6 why I left New York is the people. Now, before that sounds too bad, let me explain myself, because my whole family is from New York. I'm not saying anything inherently about the people from New York. I know that the locals in New York are really amazing people. They're one of a kind. So my complaint about the people in New York is not so much even about the people themselves, because I don't have anything against any people from anywhere. It's more what the city does to the people in New York. And to be fair to what I'm saying, most people in New York are transplants. They're not even from there. But the stereotype that people in New York are very tough and sometimes callous is true. On a day-to-day basis in New York, there's such a detachment between all the people there. There's a certain close-offness, if I can say that word. It just feels like people don't want to speak to you for more than a few seconds. If you do, it's suspect, or there must be some sort of agenda. There's tons of social life in New York, but it's all involved with some sort of social agenda. It constantly feels like people are social climbing or career climbing or club climbing. And the reason for this, I think, is because in New York, especially for the people that move there, I think there is an underlying assumption, an underlying cliche that it's a tough city. And to not get hurt and not get damaged by that tough city, a lot of people put their guard up and then naturally become guarded. And it's ironic because a lot of people move to New York City because there's this sense of FOMO there, and there's this sense that there's going to be amazing social life there. And once they're there, they completely put their guard up and just stay in their tiny apartments, spending their days working from home or going to work, then coming home and ordering takeout and watching Netflix. And the whole point you move there in the first place is defeated. So those are my 6 reasons why I left New York City. As a filmmaker, it's not about the opportunity for me, it's about the mental health. It's about getting in the right mental state to be a good writer and to make the best work I can make. And that wasn't in New York for me. Now, why did I choose Seattle? Is Seattle for you as a filmmaker? I can't honestly say that it is, because there's not a major film industry here. It's mostly in Vancouver and LA. So at first, when my girlfriend and I were looking at cities, the first place that came to mind for me was LA. I liked the fact that the weather was more consistent than New York, obviously, aside from the wildfires, but the fires don't hit the city so much, from my understanding. And I like that you could drive everywhere. when obviously there's not traffic. As you see, I started to realize there were some issues related to New York there, but there was nature. It just seemed like a more expansive experience, a better version of New York. But that's the thing. It just seemed like it was going to be another version of New York. And I felt that if I moved to LA, yes, I would give myself a different chance in the film industry, but I wouldn't give myself a chance on a spiritual level. I felt like I would be putting myself in the same trap again, and I felt I needed to go to a city that would push me a bit outside my comfort zone. So the cities we were deciding between were Seattle, Portland, Austin, Denver, and in the end we both just ended up getting jobs in Seattle. And you know, once we did, it just kind of felt right. There's so much going on here. It really is a major city. You have tons of industry here. You have Amazon, Microsoft, Starbucks, REI, Nordstrom, Costco, the list goes on, and that's just speaking to commercial film work and a lot of the young people that the city brings in. But that's just to say that it is a major city, and yet you get these beautiful views of nature surrounding you. You're legitimately surrounded by nature almost everywhere you go. And going back to the reasons as to why I left New York, again, Seattle is an expensive city, but the rent is so much more affordable. And yes, my girlfriend and I could have lived together in New York, but I don't care how close you are with someone, it's not nice sharing 400 square foot room with someone. Again, like I was saying, I had a problem with New York that there wasn't enough space there. There wasn't enough space to stretch my body, stretch my mind, walk around, feel comfortable. In Seattle, there's so much peace and quiet. It's not like that all over the city. There are obviously tons of problems going on in Seattle. Seattle itself is having its own transformational moment. There are a lot of political issues going on. There's a huge homelessness crisis that are serious issues. But at the end of the day, a lot of the problems in Seattle, I feel, are broadly American problems. And for me, Seattle is as peaceful of a city as you can get to, especially with the direct access you have to nature. Another thing is I love how easy it is to get around the city in Seattle. It's really easy to have a car here. Everyone drives around here, and there is a little bit of traffic. Well, I'll take people's word for it. They say that. To me, it feels like no traffic coming from New York. At most times of the day, you look up something on a map, it's almost become a joke with us when we look something up on a map. Everything is 10 minutes away from you. Whereas, like I said, with New York, if you're not in walking distance from something, everything by public transport's at least 20 minutes due to traffic, congestion, train delays. So that's something really nice about Seattle. It just feels like even if there's less to do in Seattle than New York, which there's still tons to do in Seattle, it feels like you can experience it more here than in New York because you're not as motivated to get around New York because of the obstacles I've mentioned. Like I said, there are a lot of issues with it, that Seattleites, that's what they call themselves. When I came here, I thought they were satellites. I'm not sitting here saying that Seattle's the perfect city for film or anything else. It's the city that works for me. For me, this video is not so much about moving to Seattle, because obviously there's not a real film industry here. For me, this video is about leaving New York and having, if I may say so myself, the courage to do so. Because I feel a lot of people, including myself, stay there because of the social pressure, because there is this solipsistic view in New York that there's not anything going on anywhere else in the world. That is how it feels when you're there. And I want to make this video just to say that there is other stuff going on. It's not so much about the city you move to, it's about you and where you think you're going to be most happy and most productive and in your best mental state. Because at the end of the day, in the times we're living in with the technology, the virtual nature of everything, I think this past year and a half, 2 years, has proved that you can really just do anything anywhere, especially video, especially film. People need film everywhere. Everything these days, whether advertising, whether stories, whether short film, everything revolves around video and film these days. So if you're dealing with this conundrum, if you should stay in New York or LA, I am making this video to give you permission, if you need it, to leave and go to wherever you need to go. That said, if you are happy in New York or LA, feel free to disagree with me. Give me your reasons why in the comments below. Tell me why you disagree with me. Or if you agree with me on some things, share that too. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear what you think about this potentially hot, fireplacey take.